Ed is the dean of Wheaton College, and at Wheaton College, he also leads the Billy Graham Center. Dean Stetzer, welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thanks for having me on.
To let everyone know, we don't have to rush because I arranged for Dean Stetzer to join me at the end of my show so that we could have a long conversation. It's an interview, not a debate. And even though the show will go off, the conversation will go on. It will all be posted on YouTube and on my website. Dean, welcome. Your article in the USA Today, Evangelicals Face a Reckoning, Donald Trump and the Future of Our Faith, was sent to me by an old friend with whom I have deep disagreements on politics, and he urged me to read it, and I thought it was an interesting presentation of your position, so I appreciate that. Has it sparked a lot of interest?
It has. It was, I guess, their top headline for most of the day on Sunday, and I think part of it from people who maybe don't like evangelicals, and then part of it from people who are evangelicals like me who are concerned about what evangelicalism has or is becoming.
So we share a common faith, even though I'm an evangelical Roman Catholic Presbyterian, which is neither here nor there. I'll explain it another time.
You're technically not supposed to be all those things at once. But
I know. It doesn't make me a Lutheran either. It just means I go to Mass on Saturday and I go to the Presbyterian Church on Sunday. That practice has been blessed both by bishops, and I was an elder in the Presbyterian Church, not currently serving. So Ed, what I want to ask you at the beginning, in the article, you write that evangelicals believe in the good news of the gospel that Jesus died on the cross for our sins and in our place. Would you also add, and that he rose from the dead, ascended into heaven, and is alive today?
Indeed, I would. I believe that's central to the Christian faith, that Jesus was dead on Friday and on Sunday back from the dead, and receiving him by grace and through faith gives us new and everlasting eternal life.
I thought you might. It was just excluded from the USA Today article, and I thought to myself, hey, he left out the punchline. But editors are editors. Is salvation exclusively reserved for those who put their faith in the resurrected Christ?
I do believe it is. I believe salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, and in Jesus' work alone. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
So I want people to understand you're very mainstream. Is sexual intimacy outside of marriage sinful?
Yeah, let me say mainstream is probably not the term to describe conservative evangelicals like me, but the answer to your question is yes. I believe God's reserved sex for marriage between one man and one woman over one lifetime, and I would be a conservative evangelical, yes.
Okay, so when was the last Republican presidential candidate you voted for?
I don't generally reveal who I voted for, but I have been consistently pro-life, pro-traditional marriage, pro-religious liberty, have deep religious liberty concerns now that, unfortunately, I think that President Trump's kind of erratic response over the last few weeks has led to the loss of the Senate. Now we're going to face serious religious liberty concerns related to the Equality Act and more, but in general, I don't tell people who I voted for.
Have you ever voted for a Republican president?
Oh, my gosh, yes.
Okay. I just wanted people, I thought you were more Republican than you were Democratic, and therefore I thought your credibility with my audience might increase.
Oh, with your audience. Well, I would say it's very fair to say I believe that lower taxes are better for society. I believe, so I think they would very much line up. But kind of as a pastor and a religious leader, one of the things that, I teach and preach the Bible regularly is I don't want people to say, I didn't vote for that person, so I can't listen to that person. But I think I've listened to your show. I think you and I will be very aligned on most issues.
Yeah, and I do too, by the way. And my friend, who I'm aligned with on most theological issues, we just disagree on politics. That's why I wanted you to have a long setup, and that's why I'm going to ask you, again, this is for credibility with my audience and people who will go and listen to this. You already said that most evangelicals, me included in your article, are grateful for the Supreme Court justices he appointed, Trump, and for some of the religious liberty concerns he addressed. His anti-abortion stances surprised me again. It surprised many again, me included, and for that I was thankful. You noted that. How important is the Supreme Court, Dean?
Oh, I think it's very important. As someone who's to talk about life, I one of the defining factors of my vote has to do with life and unborn life in the womb. And so deeply important. And I think ultimately that coming out of the Trump administration, I think in that article I mentioned that a lot of, he burned down the Republican Party. There'll be consequences for perhaps decades to come on what has happened to the Republican Party. And at the same time, I'm thankful for the three Supreme, and I should say publicly and vocally supported all three Supreme Court justice picks that he selected. And again, lots of other things. Again, I think part of the challenge is you can be deeply concerned about what President Trump has done to the country and, in my case, to evangelicalism, and be thankful for executive orders on religious liberty, as I am, and be thankful for Supreme Court. And let me just say, we're going to need a conservative Supreme Court, considering now, in part because of President Trump's actions, that the White House has been lost to the Republican Party and the Senate. Now you're going to have your one buffer on some of these religious liberty concerns will be the Supreme Court.
So, Dean, where I'm going with this is that I believe a lot of evangelicals will so value the religious liberty and pro-life and other matters that the president engaged in and proceeded to advance, that your arguments about the last 2 months will pale in comparison to the achievements that he accumulated, and whether or not those arguments that you made legitimately, they would never overwhelm. So that's why I was walking through these, not to interrupt you, but just to make sure that people understand you're coming from a position, I think, very similar to mine, and you view the Supreme Court as very, very important.
Yeah, far more important now than it was before the Georgia Senate elections as well, but very important in multiple ways. I believe that a significant number of evangelicals who love the Lord, to use insider language, who love the Lord, are deeply committed to the concerns about their faith, they voted and held their nose in many cases, voted for President Trump because of the Supreme Court. Now, that's not based on our research at the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center Research Institute. That's not the primary reason. The primary reason most white evangelicals voted for President Trump is because they're Republicans. I mean, they want lower taxes. They want, they're concerned about law and order. Those are the things that show up in polls. But the Supreme Court would be probably more important to you and me than to most people, partly because we are in conversations like this. You're a commentator every day. I'm a commentator less occasionally. But in both cases, the Supreme Court is a major part of the things that we're talking about today.
And again, it's an interview, not a debate. But where I would end up on this conversation is I would vote for him again in 2016 and 2020 because I value so much the religious liberty and pro-life and foreign policy and defense spending positions of the president, that while I regret what happened on Wednesday greatly and believe it was improvident and reckless of him to make that speech, it does not overshadow, nor does your argument persuade, because of the significance of what has been accomplished, because of the defenses that have been erected for around religious liberty. Yeah. But again, very quickly, let me run through the other. Do you approve of the Abraham?
Can I make one quick thing, though?
Sure.
Because you said my argument didn't persuade. I actually think my argument was not that you shouldn't have voted for President Trump in the description of what you just said. I think a lot of good, very committed Christian people voted for President Trump because of the reasons you just said so. My concern is for those who have been fooled by conspiracy theories, who have rushed in and bought everything, had this full-throated endorsement, and didn't recognize the damage he was causing within evangelicalism and within this country. I've listened up to your show to know that doesn't describe you, but I want to be able to make sure my argument was not, therefore you should not have voted for the president. My argument was we're going to have a reckoning within evangelicalism because a lot of what has happened because of some people's full-throated support, they were misled and at times fooled that he was the person that they wanted when as a person, he wasn't that person. Whether the policies were good, which has been your position pretty consistently, is not the argument I was making, though I think it's an important argument.
And my response to that is that we can't have the reckoning you request without accurately and fully explaining to people what he achieved. That is, that if you're going to weigh the decision to vote for him in 2016 and 2020, one cannot weigh it without understanding what he achieved.
That's why I mentioned those things in the article.
I know, but I want to emphasize them for the benefit of the people who will get to hear your exposition at length, because we don't have to rush, as opposed to the article, which has a word limit. I want to emphasize the reckoning, the side that had to be shorted. You mentioned them, but rather quickly, because you had to get to your major argument about the reckoning. So again, back to the questions of policy. How important is concern for and the voicing of support for the Uyghurs who are in concentration camp and the people of Hong Kong who are being suppressed?
Very important to me. I mean, I've vocally spoken up about both and have lobbied members of Congress to do so as well in support of the president when he's done so.
And how important are Second Amendment rights?
Important.
How important is the First Step Act on judicial reform?
Important.
And how important was the destruction of ISIS?
Exceedingly important. I guess they're all, it's hard to grade these by levels of importance. They're all things that I would find to be important.
Now, I teach constitutional law. I'm off this year, but I teach constitutional law, and I am very familiar with the following cases: Earl versus Hobby Lobby, which is a 2014 case before Trump; Employment Division of 1990, which, of course, long before Trump, but during Trump; Trinity Lutheran Church; Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn versus Cuomo; Our Lady of Guadalupe School versus Morrissey Baru; Masterpiece Cake Shop; Fulton versus City of Philadelphia, which is pending; Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue was last year. The religious liberty cases of recent years with the Trump court have been many and important. Do you agree?
For sure. I would also add in there Wheaton College versus the HHS, Little Sisters of the Poor, and several others as well.
You got me. Yeah, I was coming up to say, Wheaton College is dependent upon this court.
Well, Wheaton College was dependent on this court, but Wheaton College has petitioned this court and then won and was part of pushing back on the HHA's individual mandate, particularly with abortifacient drugs.
And do you believe that had the Supreme Court's appointments of the three vacancies been made by Secretary Clinton, that Wheaton College's statement of faith would have been ruled illegal?
No, not ruled illegal. I think there would have been substantial consequences related to Pell Grants and related to accreditation, but I don't think you would have seen an illegality on statements of faith. I think it would have restricted Christian colleges and universities, which is what the Equality Act will do. Will restrict Christian college and university from accessing things that all taxpayers has access to, for example, like Pell Grants and subsidized student loans for their students.
You're right under the 2015 court, Ed, but had Secretary Clinton had three appointments, a radical Supreme Court.
For organizations to have faith statements?
Yes, I do. And I believe certainly that, like Bob Jones and the civil rights case, you would lose your tax exempt status for sure under
that's what I'm saying.
And I think it would have gone longer. I think it would have gone further. And some people will argue that's okay. By the way, I think Bob Jones is correctly decided. But it nevertheless, I want people to understand so much would have happened to Christendom and to the ability to proclaim Christ as Lord under a Clinton court that they have to weigh this reckoning very carefully because they do not know what would have happened.
No, there's no question. And I would say, too, I don't think we're on the same page. I do think that even the most bizarre religious group in the most liberal state, like let's say California, people still have their faith statements. The question is not whether they can say what they believe. The question is will what they believe be allowed in a broader society? And I think that right now, evangelical beliefs under the Equality Act, which President-elect Biden has said he's going to bring forward, and has widespread support in the House and the Senate. Joe Manchin being among the few who says he won't support it. But if that passes, the Coalition of Christian Colleges and Universities believe that's an existential threat to the very existence of the mission of these colleges and universities. And that's why, for me, I expressed widely and vocally my concern about a Clinton candidacy, even the place where I ended up in some news stories about it, because I think ultimately Hillary Clinton very much worked to alienate evangelicals. It worked. She was very specific about the things that she pushed forward. But I think it's also true to remember that, the Joe Biden that you might, I was a Northeasterner, and the Joe Biden of 20, 30 years ago very much moved to the left during the primaries. And for example, his support of the Hyde Amendment was, well, if you go back long enough, he was pro-life. And so the Joe Biden today is not the Joe Biden of 20, 30 years ago, was a moderate Democrat. The question is, how will he govern? And I think that's important to note. But I let me say again with you, I think you're saying, is the Supreme Court exceedingly essential to our society? And would there have been a serious consequences if Hillary Clinton had been elected president? Yes. I would also say that there were other options. Now, by the time you got to the main election, there weren't. But there were other options before that didn't have the same character issues. And evangelicals have always believed character matters. It mattered under Bill Clinton, and then suddenly it didn't matter as much. Well, I think as the Trump administration has kind of gone down in tatters here at the end, it's about character. And I would say that I would say you and I might have walked into the voting booth going in with the same set of concerns. And I'm not the constitutional scholar that you are. I don't teach constitutional law. I teach leadership and evangelism. But walk into the voting booth with the same concerns you have and have said, all right, we're rolling the dice here. This person says he's going to support many, which is one of the points I make in the article, many key evangelical concerns. But this person, even Pat Robertson, who's called very erratic and detached from reality, will this person cause substantial damage that would weigh our vote the other way? Here's what I would say. You and I might have come to different conclusions, but I think at the same time, we need to ask the question, okay, why were so many evangelicals in full-throated? I didn't hear you saying, don't worry about what he says. I didn't hear you saying, don't worry about some of the erratic things he does. But I did hear some evangelicals and evangelical leaders say that. It was President Trump right or wrong. I think there's a reckoning why they were attracted so much to that.
Now, and again, it's an interview of you, not what I believe. What I want people to understand is that evangelicals, some of them, including me, and Roman Catholics, some of them, including me, and Presbyterians, some of them, including me, had no choice but to vote for Donald Trump because the presidential election is between two people, not
Yes.
five, and that
I
the
get it.
reelection has consequences that will be greatly injurious to the United States of America, religious liberty. And without religious liberty, we cannot proclaim the gospel. There are two primary issues that I'd love your thought. The ability to proclaim the gospel, religious liberty, is equal to the protection of unborn life. These are the two things that the church is called to do. Do you agree?
The two things, I would say they're central and important among the things that the churches are called to do. But I do think that religious liberty and life are key, I would say very high on my list of two issues. But if you say just those two things?
Oh, no,
I would
not
say-
just. Those are the two things
Oh,
at which government interferes with our ability. We are called to feed the poor, to clothe the naked, to visit the imprisoned, and to do that. But the two things in which government can interfere with
I
us.
see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Yeah, those are substantial places where government interaction can have an impact on the ability of the church to do what God has called the church to do. Yes.
So I think a lot of evangelicals and a lot of Roman Catholics who are Orthodox and Mass attending have evolved into Republicans, not because they are in love with the world, but because they are in love with their mission. And so
No, I
now
don't
to your
disagree at all.
piece.
Yeah,
Now
no,
to your
and
piece.
I would say too that conservative Catholics vote pretty much like white evangelicals, and there's been a huge move. And it's not just that. The more religious you are, the more you go to church, the more likely you are to be a Republican. People are going to get mad because I said that, but that's just math. I'm not saying that everyone who goes to church is a Republican or everyone's a Christian's a Republican, but there's been clearly a reshuffling. If you meet a person who's an atheist, they're almost always a Democrat. Not always, but almost always a Democrat. That's just numbers. Don't be mad at me because of math. Math doesn't care.
Well, you're right. And Dr. Mark Roberts, my friend and scholar, has told me of the work of a Baylor sociologist who says the greatest indicator of whether someone is a Republican is whether they will say grace in public.
Yeah,
And that's math.
I'm part of the Baylor Institute for the Study of Religion, and that comes out of their conversations there. Yeah, very much so. There is a very clear, not 100% correlation, but a very strong correlation. The only exception to that being African Americans, who break very, very differently and have done so historically.
Great. Now, where I want to go in your article is some statements of fact that you assert with which I disagree. He has burned down the Republican Party.
Yeah, I figured.
Now,
Yeah.
I have been a Republican my entire life. I've never not voted for a Republican for president, and my party's fine. Mitch McConnell is the leader of it right now, the most powerful Republican. Governors like Ron DeSantis and Doug Ducey, and senators like Tom Cotton, and former officials, soon to be former officials like Mike Pompeo, remain vital influencers of the polity, and the party is fine. It's not 1964 when it was almost destroyed.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of. I mean, I've talked to several senators and congressmen, and I think they believe that these last few weeks will have serious ramifications that last for years to come. So it sounds like we just disagree. I think the Republican Party that I hope we will see coming out of that is a Republican Party that is pro-life, is pro-religious liberty. It actually has and wants to work, as President George W. Bush and Marco Rubio and others did, on a well-thought-out immigration reform plan that speaks of immigrants and refugees with the kind of language that speaks of them as people made in the image of God, worthy and dignity and respect. Even when we disagree about levels of immigration or levels of refugees, I hope we even return to the historic levels of refugee resettlement under Reagan and under Bush and under Clinton and Obama that were so cut. So I do think that I'm comfortable with burning down the Republican Party, but I do recognize that there's a whole lot of people that are still there making a difference. I'm concerned that 2 years from now it's going to be a very different world.
Yeah, and Dean, I believe all that. In fact, I'm probably more radical on immigration than you are. I would regularize everyone in the United States who does not have any violence, but I would build the wall. I'm very Catholic on the social gospel. I was against the
You are.
separate.
That's kind of Catholic, yeah.
And I'm the separation of families at the border. I was the fellow who argued with Jeff Sessions that that was wrong. I
Yeah, me
rebutted
as
the
well. I was
president.
vocal about that as well. Yeah.
But I just got to tell you, the Republican Party burned down is, pardon the phrase, incendiary. It may be damaged, but 2022 is going to be a very good year for Republicans if history has any tell. And redistricting comes in. So it's going to be doubly good for us because I think we'll take the House back and the Senate is more difficult. The map is more challenging. But I think burn down the Republican Party little bit, well, a lot exaggerated from what we are.
Fair enough. One clause in one sentence, I understand. I would say that he's done significant damage to the Republican Party, and many senators and members of Congress, I think, feel the same. But the language burned down. You don't like it, I get it. But one clause in the bigger, and one sentence in a bigger argument.
So then we want to go to the next one. Some of us were vocal, often and early, about the dangers of Trumpism. It was costly. Were you also vocal about all of the good things the president has accomplished and why people might have supported him and still would have voted for him again?
Yeah, I think that's why I'm probably maddening to a lot of people is that kind of people who on the left get mad at me when I've been publicly supportive about each. I've actually written articles in national publications about each of the Supreme Court nominees. I've been. I think the role of the Christian is, and people may disagree, but I think the role of the Christian, at least in the Christian pastor, I'm a lot in the pastor role, is not to be a member of a partisan team, but think in terms of a sports analogy, is more like an umpire. I want to call and try to call balls and strikes, and this enrages people at times because when one day I'm pointing out that for example, these words that come out sometimes of the president's mouth, and I address them and I write an article about them, and then I say, and boy, I'm super thankful that we have Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court. I think this has significant ongoing ramifications. Wrote 3 different articles in different locations for that. So, yeah, I think part of the challenge, Hugh Hewitt, and I think you, again, I don't want to be nice to you, like, because we're supposed to be having this, robust conversation, but I think you have intentionally not gone all in. My article is primarily about evangelicals who've gone all in, and yet, I think at the same time, we can both affirm things the president has done and be deeply concerned about things that the president has done. That's what I've tried to do. I think that's what often you try to do.
Well, my objection to the article, Ed, is that it was sent to me by a virulent Donald Trump critic who has broken relationship with me because of Donald Trump, wants to repair it, which I welcome, but he sent it to me as a, here, I told you so. And that what I think the Christianity Today editorial, and I've talked to the editor of the news of the magazine about it, that was so controversial. I think what it has done has appeared to put evangelical Christianity on one side of this argument, which is a political argument, and that it is being used to condemn Christians who supported Donald Trump wrongly. That's my charge against the article, is that you have licensed anger against fellow believers.
Okay, well, let me tell you what I think I was hoping and I think it accomplished based on the response I've received. I think what it's accomplished is that, not all evangelicals believe the same way about the president. And part of what my hope is that we need to not see evangelicals, and it's really white evangelicals, and we're both in that, we're both white. It's to not see white evangelicals as a voting bloc of the Republican Party uncritical of Donald Trump. There are some of us who are leaders in evangelicalism who have significant concerns. Now, I didn't write the Christianity Today article on that, so that was Mark Galley. He was the outgoing editor at the time. But I do think the reality is that we need to have the maturity as a movement, as people of practicing faith, to say, you know what, there are some real concerns on this side. And I have some real concerns about the fact, many people of color in evangelical churches who see their churches embracing aggressively the president are asking, what does that mean for me long term? How do I fit into this? So I think ultimately, and I'm not saying you're not saying this, but and you're objecting to the article, I'm actually good with that. I knew you would. Happy to come on and have the discussion because I find you to be very reasonable in your discussions. But there's another reasonable side to this argument, that the consequences of voting for and the full-throated support of my main concern of a president who has walked through and dealt with some of these things so badly at times is actually going to have and is continuing to have implications on evangelicalism. And that's so again, we'll give people an opportunity to say, look, I'm mad. Yes, I get it, but that's not all there is.
Dean, I'm not mad at you. I regret that.
Some are, though.
I regret that Mr. Galley and you did not, especially Mr. Galley, that Galley divided the church, divided the body by not recognizing that people of good belief and sound Orthodox understanding could vote for President Trump in good conscience. It is not Hitler in 1933.
So how many? I guess the question is how many paragraphs do I need to say that in an article? It's not about that, but I want to make sure that people understand that I think there are people of good character. So that's again.
I think it's one paragraph. I think it's one paragraph. Not that.
In addition, in an article, it's not about that.
No, I think it's a necessary paragraph in any Galley or Stetzer piece as to what evangelicals need to do, that it say many millions of evangelicals supported the president for the right reasons and can justify their support and did not do so with hatred in their heart towards anyone or with any embarrassment to the church, and that their position ought to be respected and welcomed in the church. That's 2 lines.
Yeah, I've written that hundreds of places, hundreds of times.
I know, but it's not in this one, which is USA Today, which is being sent to me by people who do not believe what you and I just agreed on.
But let me say that one of the things I often say is I apologize that I couldn't deal with every topic, with every nuance, with every inclusion and every caveat in the way that someone wants in a 1,000-word article. But I think I've written lots on that, and even in that article have made sure that I articulate that in one paragraph. So I get you would like to be 3 or 4 paragraphs.
No, I don't. I would like it to be conclusive. I wonder if you would agree with this, that millions of evangelicals need not repent of their support for Donald Trump because it was providently taken and thoughtfully expressed and was consistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
You got a lot of caveats in there. Here's what I would say. Millions of evangelicals made what they thought was a hard decision, whether they had to vote for a candidate that intentionally was working against their values of life and religious liberty and more, and saw and thought through and even prayed through and made a decision to vote for Donald Trump that I believe they did with good character. They made the best choice that they could. They strategically thought that their vote might influence the Supreme Court or executive orders and more. And I do not stand back in derision or in any sense of condemnation towards them. I am concerned, as you know, about those who uncritically embraced many evangelicals did so, uncritically embraced a president who
we share that concern. I believe simply that Christians of integrity could both support and not support Donald Trump, and Christians of integrity could support Joe Biden and not support Joe Biden, and Christians of integrity could have voted for Hillary Clinton. I believe that Christians of integrity have to divorce politics from Christianity. I mean, you have to live what your life is, but they can be sincerely Democratic or sincerely Republican.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think there are many people who I know. I was talking to an African American pastor yesterday who sincerely voted the way he voted and explained to me his beliefs as to why, and I can respect him. And just what you described, I don't bring anything to or at you. I'm sorry, your friend and you are having a conflict. For me, as I wrote, I don't believe everyone who voted for Trump was fooled or foolish, and Trump voters are not Trump. They're not responsible for all his actions over the past 4 years, but they are responsible for the ways they responded and for their own hearts. And that's what I think, and that's what I think about for all of us. So yeah, I don't.
So Dean,
you're framing it a little bit in the sense that a friend who doesn't like.
No, I'm not. I'm about to come to how I'm framing it. I'm telling you why I got to it, but now I'm going to give it to you why I frame. I believe the president recklessly gave his speech, and that what happened was foreseeable. And he may be legally responsible for that foreseeable, and he may not, but certainly morally he is responsible for not thinking through the foreseeable consequences of his speech. Do you agree with me?
I don't. Yeah, all the nuances that I don't know. I do believe that President Trump's incendiary words had consequences.
And was it foreseeable by him? Ought he to have known what was going to happen?
Yes, I would think that he should have known that this was going to lead people to take unwise action. With all the details of what happened, I'm shocked by all the details of what happened, so I don't know.
I don't think he intended the Congress to be overridden. I'm not saying that. I'm just
I
saying
would sure hope that wasn't his plan. That would be that would change the whole equation. But
but
he
the
should have known that
likelihood of it
he exercised more
happening
wisdom.
he should have considered, will this get out of control? And once it began to get out of control, he ought to acted more quickly to condemn it.
Agree wholeheartedly with those sentences. Yes.
All right. With that, because I come at this as a lawyer, Dean, do you think the consequences?
It is like talking to a lawyer. I like it.
It's a deposition. Do you agree that the consequences of your editorial are foreseeably divisive within the church?
No, I believe they're calling the church to account, and I believe that that's well. Actually, I could say there'd be sometimes this might divide. I think it needs to lead to a conversation, and it needs to lead to some change in why so many people were so quickly drawn to a person of this character.
This is where we disagree. I think, and this is
Okay.
why I'm uneasy with your article, though less so because of the caveats you included at the beginning than with Mr. Galley's article, which I condemned wholeheartedly. That was intended to and had the consequence of dividing the church. Yours does not have so obviously that intent. In fact, I don't think you had that intent, but the inevitability of that division is just as inevitably divisive as President Trump's speech was inevitably incendiary, though it did not necessarily have the consequence. He did not intend the consequence that followed. Do you understand my objection?
I understand your objection. I would say it's an unfortunate confusion of categories. In my case, I think that what needs to happen is that some people need to know that there are evangelicals who have major concerns, and then within evangelicalism and without evangelicalism, we need to have a public conversation. That's what the title is. There's a reckoning. We need to have a reckoning. What went wrong? What was our place and part? What do we need to change inside the movement? And what I don't think they need to change inside the movement. I don't think the movement needs to say, well, let's all now become liberal Democrats, right? So that's not it. But again, in a 1,000-word article, here's where I ended it. We've reached a reckoning. What comes next will reveal where our trust truly lies. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to call evangelicals to a sense where character matters at a greater level, where at the same time we get more focus. So much of evangelicalism has been focused on political power. We get more focused on showing and sharing the love of Jesus to a broken and hurting world. That's our passion at the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center. That's our passion in most of our churches. And for most churches and pastors, they think that the pursuit of power in this administration has caused some damage inside their congregations and inside relationships. I don't think it's divisive to point out the division and the brokenness that's there. I'm looking to work together to fix it. And I think there are a lot of evangelicals who want to as well.
So, Dean, you concluded the article with, will we look inside and repent when needed? That's a good question to ask. My question to you is, will you examine the editorial that you wrote at the time that you wrote it and consider whether or not it divided the church and incited anger among the body, and repent if indeed it did?
Always open to seeing what I could do and I could do better. And I would say a similar question to you, my friend. Would you not acknowledge that there are significant difficulties and, might I say, significant faults within the evangelical church that engaging and embracing this administration has brought to the light? And if so, consider joining me in speaking out and saying, how can we walk through this better to be a more gospel-centered, biblically driven movement that I think God calls us to be?
Yes, I will. But I do believe that, as I have been throughout the Trump administration, when someone parts with a political party of which they are a member, as, for example, on child separation at the border or the president's attacks on judges or his cruel tweets, they have to speak it in a timely fashion so that it be noted, which I have always consistently done, but that I've always tried to do that without damage to the body by recognizing other people might disagree with me about the need, for example, even family separation, which I found to be perhaps the most indefensible of all Trump policies.
Agreed.
But I can understand that some Christians believe the exigency of the circumstances of the border required it because of coyotes and people falsely being claimed as children who were in fact being abused. I know the arguments. I'm always open to learning, but I don't want to divide the body because the world is against us right now, and this culture is going to crush us, Dean.
Yes, I think we're coming up to a real reality check, and I think part of that's a reckoning. But I think ultimately we do need each other, but we don't need each other to not speak truth to one another. And I think you have a habit of speaking truth and you want to speak truth. And I appreciate the fact that you caveat things just as I sought to caveat things. I think the truth that I'm bringing forward is I think that we need to have a hard conversation on why so many leaders were co-opted, why so many evangelicals were well, again, quoting Chuck Colson in the article, very few were more easily impressed than religious leaders. When he was working for Nixon, his job was to kind of persuade special interest groups. Again, very few were more easily impressed than religious leaders, the very people who should have been immune to the worldly pomp, seem the most vulnerable. If we can't say that to one another, that there has been and needs to be a reckoning, and as this administration ends in tatters, that relates to evangelical witness and reputation, I don't think that's a realistic engagement of the current cultural moment. I think we need to acknowledge where we failed and then pull together for the sake of the gospel. That's been my lifetime of ministry, and this one article is calling out this moment that we're in to hopefully get us back on the mission we're on.
So, Dean, my last word to you, and I'll give you the final word because you're my guest. I knew Chuck Colson. Chuck Colson is a friend of mine. I worked for Richard Nixon. He was a friend of mine. I understand Chuck's point of view very, very well. I think he would object to your use of it at this moment. However, the incendiary remark, it's not in tatters. It is not in any way delegitimize the support of Donald Trump or of Mike Pompeo was on my show yesterday, a great evangelical man defending religious liberty as we speak and arguing for the natural rights theory of history and arguing for religious liberty and arguing for the people of Hong Kong and China and the Uyghurs, that it's not in tatters, that one has to say you cannot judge backwards by one event because that is not how history works. I'll let you have the last word.
I didn't say his legacy was in tatters. I think there's parts of it that'll be good. I said the Trump administration is in tatters, and if we don't agree with that, I'm not sure we're watching the same current events unfold right now as Republicans are now moving over in some cases to support impeachment and more. I mean, the administration is in tatters, and I think my concern is that evangelical Christians need to recognize that this was not their only hope. Jesus isn't coming back riding on Air Force One, and when he comes back, he's not riding on. Of course,
let's extend this one more round because I don't want people to misinterpret tatters. It's a very bad week for President Trump, and his legacy has been deeply injured and will be debated, and it will never escape this week. A history of Donald Trump will always be accompanied by this. But the people who work for him in good faith, who have done good things, ought not to be pursued with a condemnation or a vengeance on the heart as is happening. And indeed, it is time for Christians to stand up for those people who have done good things and defend them against the virtual mob, which is now attempting to purge them, as, for example, Elise Stefanik has been purged from Harvard because she wanted to air objections in a constitutional fashion on the floor of the Senate. In other words, this is being leveraged as a purge moment, and Christians now need to stand with their brother and sisters in faith and defend them.
Okay, I agree. That's a little different than what we were talking about a minute ago. I do agree. There are good people who, and I know several members of the cabinet. Sonny Perdue is a wonderful, man, and well, we could list several of them.
Ben Carson, yeah, you got it. Yep. Mike Pompeo.
Yep. So again, I met Mike. No broad condemnation from me that anybody that worked with the Trump administration is complicit. Again, even Trump voters are not Trump. People who tried to do good in the midst, and it's interesting to watch how the mainstream media, Sessions, you mentioned Sessions was bad guy, then he left and he's a good guy, then he's back in the grace and he's a bad guy. And I would just say that you can't base everything good guy, bad guy, whether or not the people in mainstream media are excited about this person because they're currently being critical of President Trump.
Now, can I extend this for a little bit more? Because now we're on the president. I am not in a position to judge the president's heart. And I am not in a position to judge the president's motives. That's an old teaching of the Catholic Church. Nobody knows but God how someone stands with him. And I am not going to sit here. I'm going to condemn his action on Wednesday as improvident and reckless. But I think he has done his best to be a good president as best he saw. And that I don't doubt his sincerity in trying to do, and that he did many, many good things. I'm not going to go through the historical idiocy of comparing him to Stalin and Hitler like people have been doing. He's not that. He's made mistakes. He's just another human being.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, we are far afield from the original conversation, but I think we're a good conversation just here, so that's all good. Again, the question was, are we going to tar and feather everybody who supported the president? I'm going to be the one. I'm going to be one who consistently defends evangelicals who made a thoughtful choice. I'm going to be one who says when evangelicals didn't make a thoughtful choice, we need to ask the question why. And the conspiracy theories that have become so widely bought up within evangelicalism and more. My article was about we need an evangelical reckoning. There's some soul and heart work and some relational rebuilding that we need within the movement. I'm there for it, and I'm guessing you're going to be there for it. I think it ultimately matters, but to not acknowledge, in my view, to not acknowledge some of the substantive issues, and I might say some of this often frequent naivete that was evident in our movement is not treating it well, honestly, and fairly. So I think we can do two things at once here. I think we can work towards unity in the movement. There are all kinds of things going on behind the scenes right now. That's what you're calling for. Let's not over critique or over criticize one another. And we can say there are things that need to happen. And the language I'm using is there's an evangelical reckoning, and we need to walk through that together.
I 100% agree. I believe it is among every evangelical has to reflect on their own conduct vis-a-vis the church and politics and ask, what might I have done better to more persuasively argue on behalf of the gospel?
I'm with you.
Thank you, Dean.
Good to talk to you.